Hello, everyone, and welcome to Simply Technical. Back again here with another episode 28. And Keaton's here, pointed the right direction this time, so we're starting off
What's up?
hot. And as you can tell, the ugly guy below us is Chance. He's back again, and he's our first guest in probably 10 episodes or so.
Yeah.
Um,
Dang,
we're
first guest in 10 episodes? Y'all need to find some
something like that.
people. What are y'all doing with your
We
life?
don't know anyone. That's the thing. We don't know any competent people, which is kind of a segue into what we're talking about. Um,
That was smooth.
Chance
was
can't
smooth.
get hired anywhere because he's not competent. That's not true. So Chance has been looking for some people, gone through some hiring processes, and kind of talking about finding quality people and skilled workers just to work, whether it's software development. I know that I've looked into hiring people for engineering at one of my previous companies. So, Chance, you went through a hiring process here with a couple people with a smaller company, and as we talked about kind of before, hiring people at a small company, it's important to be competent. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience recently?
Yeah, so here recently I've been working with a small startup. We finally landed some big contracts and like starting to need actual real people. So I'm a software developer, been a software developer for a couple years now. But yeah, we've been hiring people recently. We recently put up an Indeed job posting, and that went horribly. So we're looking for software developers, preferably full stack with a little bit of experience. And we probably got over 1,000 applicants, 1,000 resumes submitted. Um, Quite a few of those are bots. Quite a few of those, like, who knows why they even put the resume in, but they put the resume in. I think we did a 5-minute interview on maybe 600 people. This is for a remote dev job. Pays all right, but it is a remote dev job, so it's like what everybody wants to do. Of course, everybody wants to live the dream, sitting on a beach drinking mai tais and writing software. So, anyways, out of those 600, there was probably 10 to 15 that were good enough to get a second interview. Out of those 10 to 15, we extended offer letters to 2 of them. So it's been, I knew it was bad, but this has been a whole mess of trying to hire somebody recently, and especially hire somebody that's competent. We had plenty of people come in, act like they knew it, like they're according to their resume, they should have been superstar, rock star developers, and you start talking to them, and they have no idea what's going on, and it's pretty apparent that they have no idea what's going on. So yeah, it's been an interesting thing to kind of dig into, and I feel like it just kind of plays into a lot of the macro job market that we kind of see going on, and some of the articles and some of the talking heads you're talking about at this point. Of it's hard to find skilled labor, not just I'm in the software world, but it's not just applicable to software world. It's applicable to try to go find an electrician or an HVAC guy, and get them out within the next 2 weeks and see what that how much fun that is. So I feel like it's not just in the software world, but that's kind of where I've been dealing with it recently, is trying to hire some people to get a dev team going for a startup.
So we talked last episode a little bit about kind of like an economic collapse, I guess, or a population. What do we call it, Keaton?
Well, we weren't really talking about necessarily economic collapse, but like future population collapse leading to economic depression, and in general the labor shortage going on right now.
Yeah. So did you give them any sort of test or anything? You said you talked to them to figure out if they knew what they're talking about, or did you just talk code and say, make sure you initialize your variables?
No, so I've never been a big fan of like the typical HR style developer interviews. So sometimes people do the whole like solve a problem in front of me, like how would you work through this problem, that type of stuff. I haven't ever been a big fan of that per se, especially like when you get nitty gritty of like how do you make an anchor tag in HTML, like what's Flexbox, like I don't know. Some of that stuff I'm not super interested in, just because like being skilled is different than remembering a lot of stuff. You can remember a lot of stuff and have no idea what you're doing, and you can be very skilled with knowing nothing. We have the internet now, if you didn't know, so we can basically Google anything. If you know what you're looking for, especially in software, you can more or less find it in about 34 seconds. So the actual what you can memorize is not near as important to me as your problem solving, and like can you think on your feet? Do you have experience? Have you failed? Have you like learned from your failures? Have you tried new things? Have you like did you have cool projects you worked on? Did you work at a cool company? Like all these things of like, do you have some background experience, and do you kind of understand what you're talking about is much more important as far as I'm concerned, than can you memorize a textbook. Memorizing a textbook is not super helpful, just because like we're in the real world and we have real problems to solve, not necessarily just by the book of, hey, make, sum a whole list from 1 to n. Like that's not helpful. Like these are not textbooks problem. These are, hey, we have a customer that needs XYZ done. They have XYZ requirements. They're looking for this the interface to look like this. We're trying to implement these things in the back end. We're trying to do it in an efficient way that we don't have to go rebuild in 2 months. That type of stuff. So like the experience and the have you failed? Have you tried new stuff? Do you have that experience is a way more important thing. And you can usually tell somebody's experience level by just talking to them. So if you have
passion as well, I mean, passion's important if they're going to quit next week.
Who cares about passion?
You don't care about passion? I care a little bit about passion.
I'm giving them money. That's passion. I'm writing their paycheck.
If I ask you what the people who got to the second interview but were terrible in person, what did they have like in their? What made them seem like they should be really competent? And then when it came to telling or being able to spot that they had no idea what they were talking about, how did you determine that?
So the first interview was not a technical interview. It was just a really straightforward of like, we're having a 5-minute call because we have so many applicants, and we're just going to be sure let's ask you some questions, and hopefully we figure out whether or not you lied on your resume. Like, it was a very simple 5-minute call of like, I don't think I can work with you, or you have a bad attitude, or you lied on your resume, or like, something really basic like that. Like, the first interview was a 5-minute, weed out 99% of people. Because we had so many people apply. And so the second interview was a technical interview, and that's where you can start. Like, the way I've been interviewing people is I'll start asking them a question and be like, hey, let's start with your resume, right? You've got, college experience, you listed a couple projects you did on your resume. Like, let's start talking through one of those. We'll just kind of work our way down the rabbit hole of like, oh, so you went to college. Like, did you do a capstone project, right? Did you do a final project? And like, what was that? What'd you do with that? What kind of problems did you solve? What did you work with a company? Did you do XYZ? And like, as you hear people's answers, you can tell whether or not they actually were involved. You can tell whether or not they kind of actually did it. They were the person slacking the group versus not. They'll be like, oh yeah, we worked with a company, but we didn't really interact with them that much, and they didn't really tell us a whole lot. And yeah, we kind of just built it for them. Like, that's not a good answer.
And our project site.
Yeah, it's not a good answer, right? The correct answer is, yeah, we work with a pharmacy company, and we're doing mobile ordering. And they really wanted people to be able to get their prescriptions through text message and be able to confirm prescriptions through text message. So we built a system where they could send out text messages to their customers and get them to confirm whether or not they wanted their prescription refilled. And the pharmacist gets alerts of, hey, whenever a prescription's up and due, they get a pop-up on their browser that says, hey, these 6 people have prescription renewals coming up. Do you want to send out text messages to them to get them to confirm their prescription renewal? Stuff like that. That's a much more interesting answer and shows you actually paid attention and kind of knew what was going on than, oh yeah, we work with a company and I really not have no idea what's going on. Yeah. So kind of go down that, and you kind of just ask questions, right? So like, we had a guy that said he had tons of Linux experience, right? So okay, cool. That's a super simple thing we can start talking to. Let's start talking about sed or bash or grep, or name another Linux command line utility that would be very common for you to interact with if you had actual Linux experience. Vim, or like we can go straight down the list of like very common tools you would use in a Linux environment. And he pretty quickly, he had no idea what was going on in Linux, right? So he had no idea what sed was. Sed is like a very basic Linux tool that if you've been around Linux at all, at least you would know what it is. He had no idea what it was. So like stuff like that of like, it's pretty apparent whenever you start asking questions and like digging down and like, hey, you don't have a lot of Linux experience because like you don't know what sed is. Like, sed has been in Linux since 1984. Like, like it's a very common tool. Even if you've never like used the tool, like you at least should have a knowledge of it if you're in that environment. So yeah, or then like you get into language specifics of like, oh, you have Java experience. Cool. Let's talk about dependency injection in Java. And then they're like, I have no idea what dependency injection in Java is. And it's like, okay, cool. You have never used a Java anything. So there's just a lot of that stuff. And like, and I try to not be super specific. I try to like go through a whole conversation of like, maybe you hit on 10 or 12 topics. And maybe one of them you actually understand and know what's going on. And we can deep dive into that. But if I hit on 10 or 12 different topics and I can't find anything you have any experience with, then I'm just like, all right, cool, not calling you back, because like we went through 10 or 12, 14 different things and you had no idea about any of them. So like you have, like, I can't figure out where your experience is at. I went through everything on your resume, couldn't find a topic to talk about. I went through just all the stuff I could think about. I couldn't find anything to talk about, just like, let's have a conversation about something technical, and I couldn't figure it out. So if I couldn't figure it out in a half-hour interview where we're talking of anything technical, you could have just a technical conversation about, like, you're not gonna you're not gonna get an offer. So anyway, that took us down to like 5 people. We did send those 5 people a quick developer test. I wrote a quick developer test for them just to give them an idea of what our code base looked like, what we're looking for. I took our code base, took it down to took 90% of the stuff out of our code base, but left a bunch of the mechanics there, the major pieces there, so they can kind of get an idea of what our code base looks like, what we're looking for, kind of how we develop. And they could also like solve the problem and prove that they kind of know what's going on and they can solve a problem. But they were super simple problems. Like for a dev with any experience, it would have been a 20-minute problem to solve. Like it was super easy, super quick. But like I said, it gave them an insight of on our side what we're looking for, and it gave us an insight of them of like, okay, cool, yeah, you could pick up PHP and write 12 lines of code. So anyway, and then out of those, we extended a couple offer letters and ended up hiring 2, and one of them quit day 2. So here we are. We have 1 developer out of like 600 applicants.
Well, first of all, you need to send Keaton that test because he doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to PHP. So
I've never used PHP, so I'm a Python essentially only, Python and R.
Okay, so from 600 to 1. So Indeed, it sounds like it's not necessarily the way to go. I guess it's a fire hose method.
Well, and I think this may be a problem too of just like online job postings of like they're just pushing, like people just like spam resumes to people, and it's like they may have not even read the job description. They just spammed a resume because you could just attach a resume and move on, right? So like there's a lot of those were just spam resumes of like they had no business applying for a developer role. Like there was no reason for them to apply at all. So
have you ever applied on Indeed, I guess?
I have.
You have?
Yeah.
So it does like they'll email you like, oh, you're looking for a job. We saw this one line on your resume that matched one of the words in the listing.
Yeah. Right.
One click apply, and you just click, yeah, sure, I'll apply, and then you move on. So
so those one click applies work really well for them to charge you for getting somebody's resume, but they don't work really well for finding an employee that's actually worth anything. But like I say, I think a lot of those there was no reason for them to apply. Like they didn't even know what a lot of those they should not have applied, but it's just so easy with especially like one click applies or one like super easy to like send your resume in. It's just super easy to just spam resumes of like, hey, I spammed 150 companies with resumes, 150 job postings with my resume, like it's just so easy to do that. And then maybe you stumble upon a company that doesn't do like a lot of interviews and just you end up getting hired on, I guess. I don't know. But
well, so in your experience, do you think it would be worth it to hire some type of recruiter? To find, if you say you need to hire 7 devs, would a recruiter be, do you think, beneficial, or do you think that's just a waste and you could find another way rather than Indeed?
Potentially. So I've worked with recruiters in the past. Like I actually don't know if I've ever got hired from a job posting that was a virtual job posting. I think I've only been hired through recruiters and or maybe like job fairs. I haven't, maybe not even job fairs, but anyway, so like recruiters are a good way to get talent in. But typically recruiters, that's questionable, right? So typically recruiters, like they try to build a relationship with you. Like I get calls from recruiters all the time because they try to like get to know you and have a relationship with you. So they can like every couple of years, like, oh, hey, we got a new job opportunity. You want to move? So recruiter could be worth it depending on what you're looking for. I mean, they do get expensive, right? So they're looking at like $15,000, $20,000 for a hired developer. So they can get expensive real quick if you're hiring on developers. But like, is that $10,000 or $15,000 worth it for you to get an applicant that actually gets hired versus like you spending a week and a half interviewing people and get one person out of the deal? It kind of depends on what your time investment is. Like, do you have bandwidth to do it? I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into play. We haven't hired a recruiter yet, but doesn't mean we won't hire a recruiting agency. But yeah, it does get pricey real quick because I'm pretty sure their price tag is like $15,000, $20,000 per filled position for a developer.
Yeah, so like if you did 600 phone calls at 5 minutes a piece, just estimate, that's 50. Is that 50 hours, right?
It was a full week basically.
So like
the guy I was doing has been a whole week.
I guess
on it.
I mean, if you spend, I don't know what your what a typical billing hour, but just say it's $100, like that's $5,000 right there. So $5,000, you could equivalent it to $5,000 to one hire, or you could say two, I guess technically, if that person
actually stayed instead of quitting on day 2.
So then it doesn't. If it's $15,000-$20,000, it does sound like it doesn't make sense unless you got just money oozing out of you. You got money to burn.
Yeah, it depends. And like we learned a lot with the Indeed job process. So hopefully like we're gonna start hiring. We're hiring more people here soon. So hopefully this next time we learn a little bit about like better ways to utilize the tools. So hopefully this next time is not as bad. But yeah, it's a process. It's for sure a process.
So how do computer science grads graduate with a degree and not know essentially anything technical or know technicalities very well?
Because colleges are just degree mills, so they just want to take your money and give you a degree, right? They're not actually there for you to learn anything. They were there for you to pass the test and get a piece of paper.
And get hired. They want you to get hired though because they want to be able to put on there. We have 80% placement rate.
Exactly. So like they're a degree mill, and like there are colleges better than other colleges. A lot of it depends on the professors, like how much they care, and like there's a lot of factors that go into play, especially in something as technical as software development, and it's as new as software development. There's a lot of factors that go into play of like, does the college have a decent set of professors? Do they just want your money and burn through? Like, does anybody actually sit down and design the course workflow? Does anybody sit down and think about what you actually need to get a job? A lot of times these people they're just stealing answers off everybody else and submitting, like one person solves the problem and everybody else turns in the same code. There's just a lot of stuff that goes on. It's like there's plenty of ways to cheat your way through college, and you can just memorize a few things and make your way right through college. So there's just not a good colleges just don't seem like a good way to prepare you for a lot of like super technical fields. So a lot of the stuff like you end up on the job training a lot. So like your internships, and when you do an internship for software development, you'll probably learn a lot more in the internship than you did in the 4 years of college, because it's all applicable. It also depends on what internship you get. Like, did they just stick you in a corner and not care about you, or do they like actually like help you like learn as you're an intern? But just kind of depends on, just everybody's kind of got a different workflow and different way they made it through college. But yeah, there's a lot of cheating in college. There's a lot of colleges that are just degree mills that just like, oh, cool, we got a piece of paper. Here you go, have fun. They don't actually care about learning anything. But like I say, so there's a lot of stuff that goes on. Part of it is also that software development's so new, and like we haven't really got a good way to. I don't think we have figured out a good way to teach it yet.
Yeah, makes sense. Seems to me like it can almost be a college could almost do better or produce better graduates by saying, "Hey, we need this piece of our software infrastructure built out at the college. You do well, you graduate."
And they're not teaching you job skills either, right? As a developer in the real world, you're not writing new code. Like there are edge cases, like I'm at a startup right now where I'm writing new code. Like 85% of my job is writing new code, and other 15% is like digging through other code that I wrote the last year to find issues with it or upgrade it and change it. Whereas most companies, like when I was at Boeing, it was like 30% of my job was writing new code maybe, and 70% of my job was reading old code and doing requirement management and just doing all the other like big company jobs around software. So really college is all like most of the stuff you do in college is super small projects. They're super small projects. They're like little one-off stupid things that you build, like the little toys basically that you build, maybe 150, 200 lines. That doesn't prepare you for, hey, you just got dropped in a code base of 500,000 lines. Here's a bug, go find it, right? Like that. I haven't ever heard of that being taught in college. Of here's a 500,000 line code base. We have a bug. When the user does this thing and this thing and this thing in this order, it's broken. Like go find the bug. And right, you went from, hey, let me build this 100-line like toy project to let me go dig through 500,000 lines of code to find the offending lines of code that are causing this bug. So like that skill set is just not taught at all, or at least I haven't heard about it being taught. I got none of that in college. So that's like a big thing too. It's like we haven't figured out a good way to teach it either, because we're not teaching what you actually do in the real world. Like probably 10% of the skills you learn in college apply to the real world, and the other 90%, like I don't even know why you learn it because it's not useful.
Yeah.
How much? I guess we have very limited. We all went to OC, so very limited professor base, but how many of the professors in college do you think have any real job experience? Since software development is quote unquote so new, do we even have real world, or they're just like, hey, you used a computer before, we need you to come over and teach this class from this textbook?
So that's another big problem in colleges, especially in the software world, of a lot of like teachers and professors will not actually have as much real world experience, right? So you will have the professors that kind of retired from the real world and went off into the professor land of like teaching stuff. But you have a lot of people that have just been in academia and teaching it again, because, right, if you do software development, like most colleges cannot compete with the software development salary. So like it's pretty easy to have a lot of experience in software development and make $150,000 a year. Like like the amount of college professors that make $150,000 a year is not near as many as the amount of jobs that are available for $150,000 a year programmer with like tons of experience. So that is a big problem, and it's a problem in any industry that's highly paid. Is that how are you going to have professors that have real world experience when you can't compete with the salaries of somebody that has real world experience? Because like, why would they teach a college class when they could just go get a job and make twice as much, right? So your $80,000 a year professor job is not near as nice as $160,000 a year job at Facebook or something, right?
And you're working more hours as a professor, typically, right? Like,
well, it's weirder hours. It's a different schedule for sure. Of like typically, like most developer jobs are an 8 to 5 job, or 8 to 4, or 9 to 5, whatever it is. Whereas a professor, like you're gonna have like classes spread out throughout the day. Maybe you have like some night classes. Like it's a lot different schedule for sure.
And you got a grade. I mean, I guess you can get TAs or.
You're a computer science professor. You automate that.
Yeah. So, anyways, there's just a lot of things that go into it of like whether or not a professor has real world experience. I would say out of the professors I had, like 3 out of the 20 probably had real world experience that I've been like, yes, I would enjoy learning from you. There was one professor we had that was super smart. Like this guy was off the charts IQ wise. And so like he was really cool to like learn machine learning and artificial intelligence from, because he could recite the textbook front to back to front, and also like give you all sorts of other interesting information that wasn't actually in the textbook. So like there is a place for academia in the software world of like learning theoretical stuff. It's just not the major use case for a software degree typically. Like a software degree should be treated more as like a trade school and less as like an academia theoretical degree. But we treat it like a theoretical degree. And so I think that's probably part of the reason why as well, of people get out of college and need 3 or 4 years of experience before they really like start to get a good grasp of software development, because they should have went through a 3 or 4 year trade school, not a 3 or 4 year, like, let's talk about theoretical stuff.
So what do you think about self-teaching software versus college degree? Kind of went over the college degree, but you meet very many self-taught devs.
I like self-taught, but it's like it's going to be harder for you to get a job in general. So whether or not I like self-taught isn't actually applicable in the real world. So the real world still likes degrees, because typically HR is in the way and they say you'd have a degree to work here. So especially with places like Boeing, like big companies have a rule of like you have to have a technical degree. There were people I worked with at Boeing that couldn't have they couldn't be a software developer or a QA tester, or like they couldn't actually have a real job doing it because they didn't have a technical degree, even though they were the most qualified person in the room. Like I worked with people that flew AWACS for 20 years, but like they're the most qualified person in the room, but they couldn't have the job because they didn't have a technical degree. So like there's plenty of cases like that where somebody might have worked in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years and be the most competent person on planet Earth, but it doesn't matter because they don't have a degree, because the HR rules you have a degree. Yeah. I'm okay with self-taught or like on-the-job experience, because like I definitely think a trade school is more applicable to most software jobs than just doing like coursework. But also like you have to be sure that their self-taughtness actually taught them something, and they didn't just copy and paste stuff from a tutorial and send it to you, right? So like there's a part of self-taught where like you have to do a little more research and digging, depending on how well they have their portfolio built, of like, hey, here's examples that I worked on. So depending on how good of a portfolio they have, if they have a great portfolio and like I can easily like dig in, spend a half hour digging through their projects and see like, yeah, this person looks competent. Like I looked at their commit history and I looked at how they solved the problem. Like I followed step by step through their commits. I'm like, oh yeah, this looks plausible, of like they actually wrote this instead of just copy and pasted it from a tutorial. So there is plenty of room for self-taught. It just depends on what company you're looking at, depending on like how everybody feels about it. and what you're trying to get accomplished.
So I always say,
but I mean, you gotta have the experience too. Like at some point in time, the rubber meets the road of do you know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
But that applies to self-taught or college taught, right?
Well, I'll say I think self-taught typically will have less, I guess, technical knowledge on things that seem basic sometimes that they have just passed over, but it's more self-taught could be better at problem solving. I guess where I'm going is I self-taught. I'm not a full developer or a full stack developer or anything. I'm mostly data science, but essentially self-taught. And like you said, it was cookie cutter courses that I was doing, and I was copy and pasting stuff whenever I didn't know how to do it. But then at work, I actually had to solve my own problems, and that is whenever I put everything to work, and I probably got 10 times better in a span of 3 or 4 months versus 2 years of self-teaching, doing some Udemy Python course or whatever. But there's still, like, as I mess around in projects, there's still like basic stuff that I always passed over. I mean as basic as using GitHub, push and pull and making commits to new repositories. Like, never learned that stuff, and I'm figuring it out right now, despite having done all this fairly advanced data science work and intermediate developer work. So there's a weird gaps in some of the self-taught stuff.
Yeah, you're gonna have weird gaps no matter what you do, because like most colleges
retain some, and you're not gonna retain some, others.
Yeah, well, that and like you never like coursework, the coursework somebody did, like you never know with like college to college what the actual coursework is. So like most colleges don't teach how to use Git. Like most colleges, I would say a significant portion of software developers that come out of college have no idea what Git is, or if they have any idea what Git is, they think GitHub is Git, and it's like, no, guys, this is a completely different. This Git is the tool. GitHub is somebody's server, somebody in the cloud that you're using to store your data.
Yeah.
But like basic stuff of like, hey, a pull is a fetch and merge. Like, you ask any developer, what's pull do? Like, I swear 80% of them won't know that, hey, pull is just a fetch and a merge. Like, I can do the same thing, just a fetch and merge instead of a pull, right? So, like, there's just stuff like that of, like, and how, like, the commits get stacked, how branching works. Like, colleges should teach a whole course on Git because it's super applicable to the real world. And, like, there's a lot of, like, you have to know your way around Git to interact with the real world. So everybody uses it for software repositories or software version control now. So, like, there's a ton of stuff they should have learned, but most developers don't get near the experience in Git that they should in college.
It's crazy because I would have assumed, I mean, just running into this exact problem in the last like 3 weeks, never having used Git, never promoting into GitHub and starting new repositories. Like, that seemed like I was sure that college grads would have been pros. That would have been like the very first thing they learned.
You're lucky if they've seen a terminal at some point in college, right? So, like, especially like, and that's another way, like, one thing, an interesting thing that I've kind of come across is that a lot of your good developers will cuss, like, using some sort of Git GUI. They will legit never touch a Git GUI. They will not use anything because they'll just use the terminal because they've got the terminal down. It doesn't mess it up. They know what they're doing. They know how to use it. They know how it works. They know, like, when they mess it up, they know how it's messed up instead of like some user interface that gets borked and you can't figure it out. Like, most developers that are good that I've interacted with, whether through work or whatever, they never touch it. They always use Git from the command line or from the terminal. And it's like there are things like that too of like are kind of easy one-offs of like, how good is this developer? I don't know. Can they use Git from a terminal? They're probably okay because they at least spent the time to sit down and learn Git from the terminal because they were so pissed at a Git GUI that it caused issues. But yeah, no, there's a lot of surprising stuff like that you would think would be taught in a college course that most developers don't. Even if it is taught, it's a very, very small subsection of it, and they didn't learn near enough to be good with the tooling.
Yeah.
So, like, because there's like, but I mean, you all have different spots that you didn't learn in college, but everybody's got different spots they didn't learn. Like, you can kind of assume, like, okay, well, you went through college, you took an object-oriented programming course. Like, okay, cool. Like, I can probably assume you had an OOP course. Did you actually learn anything from the OOP course? I have no idea, but I can at least assume you took it. Like, I took processor architecture courses of, like, I legit have never ran into an issue with needing to use processor architecture of like, hey, here's how a command gets executed in a processor. Like first it goes through here and then like I could spout off all the different like pieces of a processor, or at least the conceptual pieces of a processor. Have I ever used that once in my job? No, not once. Like it's cool stuff to learn, but like that was a whole college course or 2 college courses that I could have spent time learning other stuff that would have been much more applicable to the real world, which is why I'm kind of thinking, so processor architecture is important for the theoretical side of computer science. It's not important for the actual like doing the work. So that's kind of more of me pointing towards like, why don't we do trade schools for software? We could do computer science degrees so the theoretical guys that want to work at Google and do bleeding edge stuff with quantum computers, like sure they have to know some of that, but for your day in day out people, like a lot of people would have been just fine with trade school to like learn applicable job skills instead of just let's teach you all the theory behind everything, like all this arithmetic, like all the Boolean logic and what's the linear algebra and like all this, like there's tons of back stuff that I learned math wise. It's like I never use this stuff, guys. I never use this stuff. The most that I used is when you negate an and you or the knots or whatever, right? Like that's the biggest thing that I use, and that's just like at some point in time you learn that. So like, hey, it wasn't and I negate it. Okay, now I negate both sides and or instead of and it or whatever. Like that's like the biggest thing I learned from all my like linear algebra and whatever there's some subsection of math that's for Boolean operations or whatever. But yeah,
I mean that's never used for people who are building cutting edge AI essentially.
Yeah, like
1% of your developers.
The number of times that I need to know, like, hey, in hexadecimal, the letter A is 1010 in binary. Like, the number of times that I've needed to know that has been approximately 0 in my whole career so far. So, like, there's a lot of stuff you dig into in college that's like not actual applicable real world, even though it's important for the theoretical side of like, okay, yeah, like everybody should memorize A is 1010, but like, have you ever actually going to use that? Probably not. And if you do need it, you'll just learn it because you learned it on the job of like, okay, I have Google. I can learn that, hey, Google, please convert hexadecimal to binary or binary to hexadecimal. Okay, cool. Now I know what it is. And I learned it because it was on a job training, and that took me 34 seconds instead of a whole semester of college to learn that.
And right. $1,000 later. Keaton, Threadboy time is going to be top 10 applications you needed to write software they didn't learn in college. There you go. We're viral.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So Chance, after your real world experience of working at larger companies, are you surprised at the low percentage of quality people that applied to this position?
Not really. I kind of knew it was a thing after working at the companies I've worked at. I would say about 20% of developers are really good developers. Probably another 20% are average mediocre developers that you can give a task and it'll get done in a somewhat reasonable amount of time. And the other 60 are trash. They make more bugs, they make more work for everybody. They just drag the whole team down. So there's like, I would say 60% of developers aren't worth hiring. Maybe 40% are worth hiring. 20% of the rock stars you actually want working on your software. So no, it doesn't really surprise me. Like, would I've rather had like 5 people right now working under me instead of just the one, because we're trying to hire people and it's been a slow process? Yes, but like, am I surprised? No, just because there are a lot of people that have somehow gotten to the software industry that don't know what they're doing. But it's not like most other industries where there's a lot of like gates and like there's not a lot of things blocking them from getting hired at a company. Because like HVAC repairman, like it's pretty straightforward for somebody like that has experience in HVAC to go like hire somebody that has HVAC like trade school, because they like, it's pretty straightforward. It's physical real world stuff. Like I can sit there and watch you look at the gauges and make sure the gauges are showing the right pressures. I can watch you pull the breaker out of the unit or the disconnect out of the unit before you work on it, right? I can watch you sweat copper together, right? Like there are a lot of physical things that a normal human can dig through and look at, whereas the software world is completely virtual. So it's very hard for somebody that's not super like competent to actually know whether somebody that is good or not. So that's a big problem in the software world of like, how do you hire good people? And I mean, it's a problem in everything, but at least in the physical world, it seems to be a little easier to be able to tell the person that knows what they're doing versus doesn't. And especially things that have like big codes tied to them of like, we have like regulatory compliance that we have to follow. Did you follow the regulatory compliance? Like there's a lot of big things I don't know if red tape's the right word, but something like that would prevent you from doing work in the real world that's either unsafe or just not good work. Whereas the virtual world's much harder, especially like for time it takes to do something, right? So it may take some developers 2 hours to do something, and other developers take 8 hours to do something, and like some developers take 2 weeks to do the same thing. So like, but like knowing how long it's going to take is very hard. We haven't figured out a good idea of how long something would take. Whereas if I'm going to go swap a compressor on an HVAC unit, I'm pretty sure we can more or less guess it's going to be a 4-hour job, right? Like by the time we know, hey, we're going to evacuate all the R134 or the R210, whatever it uses in the system. We have to go like unsweat the old compressor. We have to sweat the new lines together. We can put the new compressor in. We have to do the electrical side of it. Like we can more or less dig down. We know how long this compressor swaps takes.
There's 12 steps to do this.
Basically, like we've done it enough times in the real world. We pretty much know, like, you're a competent human, you can do it in 4 hours. Whereas the software world, we have no idea, right? So you have no idea if even competent developers, like I could quote something as taking 4 hours, it could take 16, it could take 2, and there's no way to know. Like, am I going to be within a magnitude, an order of magnitude? Probably. If I say it takes 1 hour, is it going to take 10? That's unlikely. If I say it's going to take 1 hour, it'd probably take less than 8. So I'll be within an order of magnitude, but that's still pretty bad estimation. So especially with new developers and stuff, or people that you're not actually sure, like it's hard to give them work and know whether or not they're doing like productive work, because like, how do you know? You basically have to over the shoulder somebody to understand whether or not they're actually productive when they're working and if they know what they're doing, because like we have no idea how to estimate something in software.
Mouse clicks per second.
Yeah, like how fast can you type? Like, I don't know.
I mean, that's what it would kind of come down to, is like how many keystrokes are you doing per minute? And okay,
like, then you have like perverse incentives where people make something that could take.
Well, I mean, that's not something you talk about. You just go, hey, you've been working? And like, oh, well, you didn't touch your mouse in 4 hours. Like, are you sure?
But that's like, what's the, is it Abe Lincoln that said, if I have 10 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to sharpen my axe for 9? Like, and like, there's part of that in the software world too, of like, if I have 10 hours to complete a task, like it may be smarter for me to do research for the first 6 than it is for me to actually start working on the problem, because like I may find something in my research and took this problem from like it's going to be a 600 line solution to a 50 line solution because I found some better way to do it. So the whole Abe Lincoln quote of, I think it was Abe Lincoln, I don't know, you might know, like, or maybe if I have 10 hours to cut down a tree, I'm going to sharpen my axe for the first 9, of like, I'm going to be sure I know what I'm doing and have the right tools for the job, and spend the time getting ready for the job more so than actually doing the job. So there's all sorts of stuff like that goes in development, of like, I could stumble upon a solution that gets it down from a 600 line, like 3-day problem to a 50 line, like I can do some 4-hour problem.
But it's usually pretty easy to identify after a little while, after some amount of time, who's good and who sucks.
Yeah, but you have to work with them, right? So you have to have a competent person that works with them. And so that's the deal of like, there's 20% of your competent people that could work with somebody new. And it's like, how much of their dev time is worth spending with a new guy to see if he's going to work with anything or not, right? These development companies have so much money that they can basically just throw money at the problem of like, I don't know, hire more developers, just hire more. And then like, we'll ultimately figure out after they work with us for 6 months whether or not they're good or not. Because like, can you actually waste the time of the 20% that are like your rock stars? Like, can you actually waste their time like helping out the new guy and like seeing whether or not he's worth anything? Like, you're not going to waste that developer's time, because that developer's time is worth more than gold. Like, that developer should be making $600 an hour, but he can't, because you have 12 developers that are all making way less money, because yet the one supports the other 12, because the one does the amount of work the other 12 do. So like, you can't waste his time doing something stupid, right? So like, there's just so many perverse incentives for like companies, and they have so much money that's not a big deal to just hire more developers. Like, we'll just the cream will rise to the top. Like, we'll just fire someone later. Like, I mean, even people that get done. So let's say they're 30%. We hire somebody, and he's 30% as productive as the rockstar guy. Well, if I can hire 10 guys that are 30% as productive as the rockstar guy, I can still get code done and software shipped, right? So like, I'm still shipping software, and they are more productive than not having them, because my rockstar guy is already tapped out. So like, these other developers are adding productivity. It's just diminishing returns in the sense of, okay, well, they're only 30% as productive as him, but I get 10 of them. Like, okay, now I have 2 of him, right? Because I can have 9 other people or 10 people like working and doing the work he would have been doing as by himself. So like, there is still incentive to hire these people that aren't as good. It's just when you're resource constrained, especially like a startup or small company, you're looking for highly skilled people that are good at their job, instead of looking for people that are just mediocre that are good enough, because bottom lines matter.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier about, well, would I rather have 5 Is that kind of going hand in hand with what you're saying of, well, I'd rather have 5 and get 50% done or 50% progress, than
I would
have 1 and only get 10% progress.
Exactly. Yeah, but I would much rather. So, like, one thing to think about is software team size. Of like, if I was to choose between having a team of 5 Rockstar developers or 50 people that were mediocre, I would choose the 5 Rockstar any day. Even if they're like overall less productive, the code they're going to build and the software they're going to build is be way better than the 50 mediocres. So the 5 Rockstars versus the 50 mediocres, I'll take the 5 Rockstars any day, because there's a lot of software. Some of the companies I've been at in the past, like, they had like 400 developers there, and it could have been easily handled with 50 developers if they had good developers. Like, the software could have easily been handled with 50 developers, but they had 400 because you can't just hire 50 good developers, right? Like, we haven't figured out as an industry like how to reliably hire good developers. So they have to have 400 instead of 500 instead of having the 50 they should have had to actually build the software.
Well, and how do you track that? I mean, that's probably not there's not a good measuring stick when it comes to what's a good developer currently. I mean, I guess if you're currently working beside them, like you said, then you can kind of tell. But if
you have a competent developer working with an incompetent developer, they will find out real quick. But having the competent developer working with the incompetent developer, like, say, there's an incentive to not do that. So it's hard to track because you have no idea how long something's going to take. So if you give somebody a task, you legit have no idea if it's going to take 5 hours or 50 hours.
Well, how did they track at the last big company you worked at?
So our team leads would estimate projects, and then you would get graded based on what their estimations were. So if they estimated that they gave you, 50 hours of work and you could put it in 40, you got a good score. If they estimated they gave you 50 hours of work, you could put it in 80, then you got a bad score, and you would have to justify like why you completed 50 hours of work in 80. But like, there's plenty of ways to justify the 50 and 80. There's plenty of things to bring up of like, oh, I ran into this problem with this system because I couldn't find this data, or I ran into this problem, had to rebuild this thing, so it took longer than expected. Like, the estimations were off. So there's plenty of ways to get around the estimations. So like, getting a bad grade
data from somebody else.
Yeah. Getting a bad grade was pretty easy to work your way out of if you knew what you were doing. You could basically work your way out of anything, any sort of bad grade, because like, you could talk through all the reasons why it took you longer than expected. Like, if you did 50 hours of work in 150, like, good luck talking you out of that one. But if you did 50 hours of work in 80, like, there was no reason you wouldn't talk your way out of it and get a good grade still, because like, there's just plenty of things to bring up of like, I ran into XYZ issue, so it took longer than expected, right?
Well, did they account for like waiting on other teams, I guess?
Depends on what you're working on. But yeah, I mean, that was all taken into account. Your team lead is a software developer. Like, they're supposed to have a good grasp of what you're doing, how to solve the problem, what the problem entails, like what systems it entails, what extra teams you're going to have to work with to get the change implemented, how long it's going to take you to actually get it merged up to main, how long it's going to take with quality assurance to get through them and get everything documented and all the manuals built. Like, they take that into account for sure. Like, when they're estimating of like, I think this will take 12 hours to do. I think this will take 30 hours to do. I think this will take 5 hours to do. Like, that's all part of the estimation process, but it's just still hard to estimate. Of like, they could be like way off whenever they do that, because they don't know what you're going to run into.
Keaton, I don't know if you have another question, but last I have for kind of this spiel here, is that a good system? And one, or I guess two, you can't really do that in a small company because you don't have enough excess developers to just grade people, or as you call it, grade.
It's the best system we have. So their system was the best system I've seen so far, is how to track employee progress, but we don't have a good solution, a good system to track it. So we haven't figured out a good system yet, and it's going to take another 40 years before we have a good system. So we're just still so bleeding edge with software that we're still figuring all this stuff out. So we've been building bridges for hundreds of years now, or maybe even thousands of years, depending on with how far back you go, and we're building bridges. So like, stuff like that, we've been doing everything else for so long. We've been building cars for over 100. Like, we've been doing everything else for so much longer that like, we just need more time in the software world to figure out how to make all this stuff work correctly, like how to correctly do this. So we're just still so bleeding edge, even though it feels like software and phones and tablets, computers, the internet have been around for a long time. Like, the grand scheme of things, we haven't been doing this for very long.
Not at all.
So most of your major development languages have been around for 20, 25 years. So like, name a big language you interact with. Most of them were developed within the last 25-ish years, and that's still relatively new. And technology has changed insanely in the last 25 years. So we've gone from basically using sticks to start fires to using like torch lighters or something in like 20 years. So we went from sticks and stones to get, or like the little thing you spin and get friction to start your fire. We went from that to now we have torch lighters, and we have all the infrastructure to get butane out of the ground and get it in a lighter and get the torch to work, get the flint to strike a thing. Like we have all the infrastructure from, hey, we were using sticks and stones 25 years ago, and now we're using butane torches. And like that's a huge technology jump in 25 years. So like there's a lot of stuff that just like we're just still so new and we're still figuring everything out.
So I guess finishing up this section, question. I mean, we already kind of talked about the undergrads and computer science and the problems with it, but I'm assuming, I mean, you have to be somewhat competent in general to be able to graduate with a computer science degree with above like a 2.5, just assuming. I mean, you don't necessarily know everything, but it's a degree that's a bit harder than most degrees.
It's a little bit harder than underwater basket weaving. Yes, you're correct.
Yes,
yes. But can you still cheat through it? Yes, you can still cheat your way through it like any other degree. So
is it okay? Do you think it's because of that people are in the workforce are more incompetent, or do you think it's just because we're lazy and don't really feel like learning anything new after we've got our degree?
I think 20 to 25% of people that graduate with a software degree should never have graduated with a software degree. They just don't have the technical skills. They don't have the mental mind mapping. They don't have the actual, they couldn't ever learn it if they tried. I think 20, 25% of graduate with a degree, couldn't learn it if they tried. Could not be like a really solid developer if they tried, just because whether or not they're bad at memorization, whether or not they're bad about visualizing stuff in their head, whether they're bad at problem solving, whatever it is, they are not able to learn it, just whatever reason. So 20% there, 25% there. I would say another 25% are the lazy ones that just kind of they did the bare minimum to get by through college, and that was all they did. So okay, cool. Yeah, no, I did the required toy projects, and I slacked on group projects, and I made it through college. Then you have another 25% that somewhat applied themselves and are okay when they graduate from college. And so okay, cool, they're okay. They give them 3 or 4 years of working experience and they'll be decent enough and be good enough developers. And you have the top 25% that's cool, they're rock stars. So I can hire them straight out of college and give them 6 months and they're gonna be, spewing code out and be good. Now the middle 50 is the problem, right? So the middle 50 is the group that we would like to get to a point where okay, no, you're more competent. You're not we're going to have people that squeak through the bottom 25%, whatever they cheated, whatever they did to get through, they should have never got the degree. You're going to have that no matter what. So the middle 50 is actually a real problem of what do we give the middle 50 to get them up to a better bar, right? Whether, however far they go, how do we get them better? Is that a combination of improving how schools are structured, improving coursework, different projects,
AI.
We can talk about that all day long of yeah, and it's the AI stuff is bad for people to learn because then they just get a crutch, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of like learning algebra with a freaking TI Inspire. The TI Inspire negates the reason I learn algebra. So if you have this AI writing software for people, that's just a crutch, and they're not gonna be able to do it in the real world because they're not gonna have the AI with them. Or even if they do, they're not gonna know what they're doing. They're gonna break everything. So the AI is just a big crutch, and it's like learning algebra with TI Inspire. It's not helpful for people learning. Is it useful to yeah, it could be speed up development time, but is it actually useful for somebody to learn what's going on? No.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I want somebody to use freaking ChatGPT to get through college? No, I don't want them working for me. Will I allow them to use ChatGPT while they're working for me? Maybe. But do I want them to do that in college? No, not really. I want you to learn the hard way. I want you to learn the actual meat and potatoes of stuff, not just how to make the AI develop close enough code to get you past your toy project.
But the problem is it's going to be basically impossible to prevent that in college.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So there's tons of discussions of how to better improve the education system, how to what's the better way to do things, what's the better way to learn stuff. This is all conversations that should be being had. That I don't know they're being had of hey, this is a better way to learn software development than what we've been doing, or just pontificating about what the better way is. Because I think there should be a lot of discussion here about hey, how should we be doing this? Because what we're doing is not working. We're turning out developers, and you see it in the software you use every day, right? is the software getting better or worse that you use every day? Can you log into Facebook and reliably get access to stuff? Like, how many times does Facebook crash? How many times does Instagram crash? Like, in the last 6 months, how many times has a major website gone down? Like, like, is the software you're using getting better or worse? And I would argue it's getting worse. And so, like, something we're doing is not preparing people for the jobs they're having to take on. And so we just got to figure out what that means and how to make that happen in a better way to get people prepared for the jobs they're having to do. But that's with any industry of like, how do we correctly prepare somebody for the job they're going to do? And I don't think there's near enough discussion on any industry of how to prepare somebody for a job they're going to do other than trade schools. I think trade schools kind of figured out, but outside of trade schools, like I think that's every industry job of like nurses, doctors, freaking lawyers, engineers. Like, I think there's plenty of room for improvement in our typical, like, go to school, university for 4 years, maybe get a master's degree for another 2. Like, there's plenty of room for improvement there when we're talking about preparing people for the actual real world. Just things. There's also stuff like that to talk about of like, you get into like, people don't know how to file their taxes. Like, why do we have 16, 18, 20 years of schooling and you don't know how to file your taxes? Like, surely at some point in time we could have spent the 3 months it would take you to learn how to file a 1040 easy. Like, surely in that 16, 20 years of schooling we had, you could file a 1040 easy.
I push back on this all the time, actually, because I say school should be preparing you to learn on your own, and you can just go watch a freaking YouTube video and learn how to file your taxes in 2 hours.
Well, sure, but school is not preparing you to learn on your own.
No,
so,
it's not. It's not.
That's a bad argument. So, like, I feel like we should carve out the 3 hours of the 3 months it would take to teach a 17-year-old how to file a 1040 easy. Like,
but I just don't think 17-year-olds care. Like, you got to have some skin in the game to understand when it comes to those things. Like, I took a finance class in high school. It meant absolutely nothing to me until, okay, I got in the real world. Well, we got to learn some finance. Like, okay, well, what the heck is an ETF? What am I investing in? Am I gonna invest in individual stocks? Am I gonna buy S&P 500 ETF? Which is what I end up doing. Bond. What weighting do you want in bonds? Like, those things I heard in high school, but it meant nothing.
Right, but you have to think about of like, how do people learn, right? You don't learn something immediately. You learn things over repetition over time. So, like, the fact you were exposed to what a 1040 easy is means the next time you hear about a 1040 easy and have to deal with it, you'll be much more likely to understand what's going on than the first time you heard about it. So, like, the first 20 hours of you learning something, like, this is a Malcolm Gladwell thing, of like, the first 20 hours of you learning something, you can go like really far in the first 20 hours. So just getting off the ground at any point in time, like, gets you way farther ahead than if you've never heard about it before, because that stuff's starting to already cement in your mind. So, like, the fact you've heard you heard the word ETF in high school meant you were leaps and bounds of never hearing the word before in your life. So even if you couldn't still file a 1040 easy when you graduated high school, the fact that at some point in time you'll have to file a 1040 easy and you'll kind of understand what that is like it's a huge step in the right direction of, at least you kind of understand something about the problem instead of like going in the problem blind. So, like, even if they don't know anything about it, but that's another thing of like, okay, what's a 17-year-old care? Like, okay, maybe they don't, but like, okay, then I want to argue about like, why are we pushing for more schooling if the 17-year-old doesn't care about learning? Like, why don't we do less schooling?
I would get on board with that argument.
So, like, there's like, and this is all discussions need to be had of like, okay, well, if the actual answer is no matter what we teach a 17-year-old, they're not going to learn, then like, okay, let's send the 17-year-old to go start picking trash up off the street, or go start flipping burgers, or go start laying concrete or something. Like, put them to work. If they're not going to learn, like, why are they sitting in school wasting money and wasting time? Right? Like, okay, you don't want to work? Okay, cool. From 16 to 18, you have a 4-hour school day and a 4-hour you're going to go lay concrete. Cool, have fun. Okay, now that you got past high school and you know hard work sucks, now you're going to sit down and learn in college, and you're going to have an incentive to learn something in college. Like, that was my dad's goal in life. Make sure Chance does all the sucky jobs so that when he gets to college, he won't want to do a sucky job for the rest of his life. So, like, there's tons of other discussions to have around stuff like that of like, if we can't actually teach a 17-year-old anything, why are we trying? I'm like, okay, cool. The argument is we can't teach them, then why are we trying? Okay, cool. Send them to work. Like, they have plenty of energy. They're young. Make them break their backs laying concrete. Okay, cool.
We dumbed down the education a long time ago. I mean, people were learning calculus in like 9th grade, and now you wait till college. So
yeah, exactly. So like, we're not improving the way, like, the things we are changing in the education system have not improve the outcome of skilled labor coming out of the end of it, right? The whole idea behind the education system is to prepare you to be in the real world, whether that's to have a job, whether it's to function, whether it's to know what a tape measure is, so you can measure your living room to buy a couch, like whatever it's supposed to prepare you for, it's supposed to prepare you for the real world. So like whether if it's job training, it's job training, right? That's the kind of the idea historically is job training. It's not doing that any better. We've been doing this forever, and we've been making changes, and we're getting further away from being prepared for a job than we've ever been in history. We have kids graduating college that have no idea they have to call the electric company to get electricity on at their apartment when they get out of college, right? We have like major deficiencies here of like this person cannot function in the real world because they were not taught anything growing up or all the way through their school years. Like they have no idea what taxes are. They have no idea what any of these basic things are in the real world. And it's like, how are they going to do a job when they don't even know how to turn their electricity on at their apartment?
Well, how much of that is from a broken family or a family not caring? Because like my dad, like the finance thing, like I took a finance class, but like I knew most of it because my dad throughout my early, middle school to high school life was telling me, hey, you need to start investing in your retirement. This is what a 401k is, and this is what an IRA is, and this is how you do your taxes. Like, so I had my dad teaching me that kind of stuff. Like,
oh, for sure. And we could talk about the broken family thing, but that's a whole different thing we're trying to optimize for, right? Like, I always, I like the quote of, I have to play the game, not design how the game is played. So I can't design the game and change how family structures works, or I can't design the game and make parents care. So I have to play the game of, okay, how do we get people prepared for the real world? Because I'm playing the game, not designing the game, right? Would I like to improve families and like make sure people like learn this stuff in their family? Yeah, sure. But like, I have to play the game given. I can't design a new game to play. So there's no theoretical game. We're in the game we're given. So however we're here, not as big of a deal. Like that's not a big of a deal where we can't design a new game to play. We have to play the game given. So the idea that we're optimizing for something that doesn't exist of like, yeah, we would love for families to be more involved with financial planning. Well, the answer is most of Gen X that's raising kids right now was never prepared for financial anything. So most of millennials were not prepared for anything. So you think Gen Z is going to be prepared, right? We have to play the game given. So like we can't go back and reteach a whole generation anything. So we have to play the game given of like we have to keep preparing people that are coming up in the new generations to be better equipped than their parents were. So like was Gen X more prepared? Sure. Were millennials less prepared than Gen X? Probably. Were Gen Z prepared, less prepared than millennials to graduate college? Probably. Like we keep going down, dumbing down the standard where we need to be going the other way of bringing the standard up. And whatever your metrics are, like you have to have some sort of metrics to measure and see if you're improving. But I would say by almost any metric you measure, we are doing worse and worse and not better.
Like we're lowering the metric.
No, we are. I mean, if you look at, there's major grade inflation over the last 10 years. Like it's a lot easier to get an A at all the big colleges than it was before. And that's most like, I mean, could be because people are smarter. Probably not, as we've talked about a lot today.
No, it's because it's degree mills. Yes, they want money. Yes. They're all degree mills of like we're riding on a reputation.
But even high school
money.
Is a degree mill, I guess you could say.
Yeah, you can get a 6.0 in high school. It makes no sense.
Teachers are highly incentivized to pass somebody on and not fail them, right? There are huge incentives for the school, for everything, right? Talk about perverse incentives. There are huge incentives that are perversing the school system in order to push people through that should never have been pushed through. They should have been held back for a year or two because they needed the extra time to learn something. There are huge incentives to make that not happen because all the funding, there's tons of things we go into of why there are perverse incentives to actually teaching somebody instead of just passing them on, giving them passing grade and kicking them out. So we've designed a system that optimizes away from that. We've designed a system to optimize getting quantity through, not quality through. So yeah, all the metrics we want down, but like we're not improving the system at all either. So, but anyway,
I digress.
I don't digress. It's a problem.
Yeah, it is. But that's for another podcast. Okay. Do you have any final thoughts or hot takes? Chance, do you want to start, or Keaton, you want to start?
I don't have any.
Keaton first.
I mean, okay, actually, I still stick with my hot take from last time. That AI is going to make it very difficult for junior devs to continue to or to get jobs.
Evan, you're up. I'm still thinking.
Okay. I don't know. Hot take is probably not hot take. I mean, I've said it before. Like colleges are failing. I don't know. I think colleges are failing in general. I think a lot of people are saying that, and we'll go down to like a power schools. Maybe a few schools will be hard for, like, say, computer programming. There'll be a select few of schools in the United States that are like, okay, here's the top 5 schools. If you graduate from here, you can work at Google and you can do that, or you can, you're a rock star software developer. I think that we'll go to that and maybe more selective.
Yeah, actually, I have a new hot take with the college thing. Hot take is that the only way to actually fix college and the whole perverse incentives of just being a degree mill is to allow people to declare bankruptcy on their student loans and for it to be on the college and not, on the government. Right now, you cannot declare. It's one of the only things you cannot declare bankruptcy on.
They'll come after your kids. If you don't pay, they'll come after your kids.
Yeah,
your kids are on for your student loans if you don't pay them, and you die.
It comes out of it starts to come out of your paycheck. They'll kick it out of your paycheck eventually.
Yeah, but this is a whole nother discussion. I don't think any debt should be forgiven because, like, you rack the debt up, you have to pay for there's consequences for that. If you do anything else, you're creating a perverse incentive in the debt. Now, should it be passed to your kids? That's a whole other story because these are decisions you made. But I think any debt you forgive, you're providing a perverse incentive on the debt of you accumulated this debt. There are extraneous circumstances of like, okay, yeah, something bad happened. But, like, I don't think we should just blanket forgive debt because debt is it's an incentive in the system to keep you doing what you should have been doing, right? So the fact that student loans are so high means that there's going to be a generation coming up that says student loans aren't what it was all cracked up to be, right? We had 4 generations shoving down the throat of everybody of like, you have to get a college degree and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. Whereas now we're waking up and realizing that that's a perverse incentive. You should not pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a degree. But, like, even like you signed up for the debt. Like, should there be reforms or like ways to make school more affordable? Probably, but just blanket forgiving debt is a perverse incentive, and you're incentivizing people to do things that are bad. We don't want people taking out debt they're not going to repay because that's somebody else's money. So, like, even though like it sounds good on a headline, even though it sounds good on a headline, it's a bad incentive to have as a country or as a world of like, hey, you can make stupid mistakes and you don't have to pay for your stupid mistakes, right? We need more incentives to, like, we need more failure in the whole world. We need people to fail more because we need them to learn from their failures.
Declaring bankruptcy is not a way to forgive. There's not a blanket debt forgiveness. That bankruptcy is basically can be life ruining. And when you have this perverse government/college relationship where they've made it to where you cannot declare bankruptcy on the loans, that just means they can continue to raise prices because they have no skin in the game. If I declared bankruptcy on my loans and it was on the college that I went to, they're not going to have stupid degrees that make no money. They're not going to pass people who are going to be losers out in the real world. So it's not a blanket forgiveness. I'm very against forgiveness in any form. It's a free market solution when they got in bed with the government, when that was ended back in the Bush administration, when the government and colleges got into bed with each other to prevent bankruptcies.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a whole other podcast discussing about whether or not we should forgive. Yeah, because I don't even think bankruptcy should be that like forgivable. Like, I think we should not do blanket bankruptcy like we do of just like everything's gone, because it is becoming more common. Like, and it's not life ruining anymore. Like, there was a significant portion of the population that declared bankruptcy in the 2008 housing crisis, and they're just fine 4 or 5 years later. Like, there are a couple years, but it's getting more and more common and hurting you less and less because you declare bankruptcy because it's becoming more common.
Yeah, but that 2008 crisis is a lot. It's LLCs declaring bankruptcies rather than individuals,
there are plenty of individuals that had their houses taken away because they couldn't afford the payments, right? We incentivized balloon payments for mortgages and people couldn't pay them. So there was plenty of people that had their houses taken away in that way crash, and they had to declare bankruptcy because of it, because they just couldn't pay their mortgage. We gave somebody that makes $40,000 a year a $400,000 house, and you just can't do that because we gave interest only payments. So I think the whole debt forgiveness thing is like, maybe we should be debt restructuring. Like, should we figure out a way to like pay it out? Like, should we figure out a debt reduction? Like, that's all conversation to have. But I think just blanket forgiving any debt is a bad way to do it, because you're creating a perverse incentive. Even though it like, okay, yeah, it sucks for a couple of years, but like you're creating a very perverse incentive for somebody. The better question is why are we giving 18-year-olds that have no idea what they want to do with their life the signature dotted line to stack on $150,000 of debt? Like, why do we give 18-year-olds that? You can't buy a house at 18. Like, you can't buy a $200,000 house at 18. Why can you sign for $150,000 of student loan debt?
You couldn't even do a business loan.
Yeah, no, you can basically not get any debt. You can basically, like, you have to get a secured credit card at like 16, 17, 18. Like, you can't even get any debt at all. And credit card companies will give out debt like nobody's business. So like, you can't get hardly any debt, but we give an 18-year-old a responsibility, and they're smart enough to sign on the dotted line for $150,000 of student loan debt. So like,
but why is that?
Is the system like, is there a problem with the system? Yes. Then I don't know if the solution is just for blanket forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to keep going on this for the whole time for another 5.
Oh yeah, this is a whole other friggin' podcast.
Yeah. You can't get a business loan because lots of businesses fail. You declare bankruptcy, and they are incentivized to not allow you or give you money because they know that it's pretty likely if you have no assets in your name that you're going to be declaring bankruptcy. Whereas in a college situation, you can't. So they have no losses on the other side. Like, a bankruptcy is not. I mean, it's a debt forgiveness, but the bank is losing out on that. It's not. I mean, that's money that they lost. So they're gonna restructure and make it more difficult to give out loans in the future, which is kind of where I'm going with that.
But see, that's the deal. We'd have to get into all this because the bank's not losing out on that, right? That's all private equity money, right? Banks have almost no money coming in, right? All that money that gets forgiven, it's all like your pension program for the teachers' retirement association or whatever, right? Like a lot of that money is somebody else's money that's been invested in the stock market. Like, almost none of that money that gets given out in loans is going to be from just like a bank having money. Like, almost all of it's going to be private equity. So it's going to be like, you declare bankruptcy. Okay, well, you took money out of the teacher's pension. Like, what do you think? This money doesn't grow on trees. Well, so like, yeah, you're taking money away from somebody else because you couldn't pay back the money you said you would pay back. Now, there's a whole rhyme and reason about like, how do we grow the economy without debt? Like, there's a ton of this is a whole nother podcast. Anyway.
All right, part 2.
Hot take.
What's your hot take, Chance?
Hot take. We're gonna have, over the next 5 years, we're gonna have major U.S. power grid issues. From all the stupidity we're doing with the U.S. power grid. Like, we're going to have rolling blackouts, like, be a consistent thing across the U.S. There may be certain states. Yeah. So this is not even close to on topic, but this is my hot take. Yeah, we're going to have significant parts of the U.S. be very common to have rolling blackouts, and potentially even like have part of the population, have like reliably, like every so often, once a week, once every 2 weeks, have power outages to their house. So right now it's California. We're going to see it across the U.S. and in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years.
Really cold, right?
So how am I going to charge my Tesla at night?
This is what I'm talking about. Of like, we're doing a lot of stupid things with the U.S. power grid, and we're not developing enough infrastructure to support all the stupid stuff we're doing. So my hot take is the fact that we're going to have rolling blackouts be a very common thing in the average American's lifestyle in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years.
They'll just ask you when you're working, and they'll just black out your house then.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have solutions to come up with, like, to make it better and not as bad, right? It'll be a lot more common to have somebody have like a battery backup in their house, or like maybe their Tesla is used as a backup battery for their house, and so like they charge a Tesla whenever the grid's on, and they could use their Tesla to power their house when the grid's off. We'll come up with interesting solutions because it'll become so common. But my hot take is it'll become very common in the average American's lifestyle to have rolling blackouts in the next 3 to 4 to 5 years.
Okay, so what's fueling that hot take? Not to get like a little synopsis or summary of what you're saying. Is that because of the electric car stuff, or?
Not just electric cars, but we are heavily incentivizing everything to go full electric. And so we're heavily incentivizing work from home. We're heavily incentivizing like go full electric. Like, natural gas is bad for you in your house. We can't heat homes using natural gas. We can't use natural gas dryers. We can't use natural gas for cooking. Propane's bad. Any sort of fossil fuels is just bad. You can't do that. So the fact that there's a lot of the population that relies on heating oil, relies on natural gas, relies on propane, relies on various forms of fossil fuels to run their house, lawnmowers, weed eaters, right? Like all of the stuff, not just electric cars. Electric cars are a problem, but not as big of a problem as it might seem. The bigger problem is the work from home, plus the fact we're pushing everything to go full electric, and we're not utilizing any of the fossil fuels for the typical stuff we would, right? Like just replacing all of our heating oil and natural gas consumption with electricity would crash the power grid, because there's so much energy we utilize from natural gas and heating oil to
heating
heat.
is so terribly efficient anyways.
Well, heat pumps are efficient. Like you can't go strips. You gotta go fuel. Yeah, you go heat pumps. Like that's not even a question. You have to go heat pumps. But because strip heating is terribly inefficient. But assuming we all went to heat pumps, like we're still, all of the heat we use would crash the electrical system, just moving like cooking and heating to full electric. So we're pushing the full electric stuff too hard and not utilizing fossil fuels enough. So like that's part of it. The work from home is another issue. So whereas historically everybody would turn their ACs off when they were at work or turn their ACs up, these people are working from home. So now we're heating and cooling more homes than we would have historically, because these people would have been out at their job, not utilizing their space, and so there would not be as much power being utilized at a home, because everybody's working from an office. Like that's a much more efficient use of space and heating and cooling when they're at an office, as opposed to everybody working from their house. So a lot of reasons why our electric usage is going up. But we are not putting enough emphasis on the infrastructure. There are interesting solutions to this.
Solar panels.
Like solar panels are one potential solution. They're not going to solve the whole problem, but they are a potential solution. Especially for the rolling blackouts and stuff. Like you could have batteries at your house and have some sort of backup power. But there's more interesting solutions than that. So like if you convert your natural gas stove over to electric stove, well, the natural gas stove would have typically had a normal 120 volt, 15 amp circuit run to it, because it basically just needs a circuit to run the igniter and maybe the clock and a timer. So like there's be very little power usage. But then you changed over to electric range, you're talking about a 240 volt, like 30, 40, 50 amp connection, like 12, 14, 18, 20 kilowatts of power to power this stove. So like you're talking about significant utility upgrades just for the fact that we have to replace breaker panels, we have to run new copper to the appliances, we got to put new outlets in, new breakers, we got to upgrade service, because these people that had natural gas heating and natural gas cooking, like they had 50, 75 amp service, now they got to have 150 amp service according to electric code. Like there's a lot of these problems we're going to have, just the fact of like we have a lot of infrastructure to rebuild if we're going to go full electric. But there are interesting solutions of like, hey, we could put a battery in the bottom of a stove. Like we could have a stove, and the bottom drawer, instead of being a drawer that nobody uses, we could make that into a battery, right? And so like this stove could just have a normal 120 volt 50 amp circuit plug in, and throughout the day it charges, and then after whenever they need it, it just uses the battery to cook. And because you're never cooking for very long, right? That high energy consumption on the stove is just going to be for maybe an hour max, and then even then it's cycled on and off, because you don't have all the burners cranked to high, even though we have to design an electric circuit to handle all burners at high for the whole time. So like there's interesting solutions like that of like we could put a battery on a stove and basically negate the need to upgrade the utility service to the house, because we put a battery in the stove. And it's like it'll increase your stove by, it's maybe $400 or $500 more expensive, but like that $400 or $500 is going to go to service upgrades. Like you're going to pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to get a service upgrade, whereas I can pay an extra $500 on my stove and not have to get a service upgrade. Similar concepts with the heating and cooling systems, like the heat pumps and stuff, to utilize some sort of battery infrastructure. And so like they could have batteries built into the units. And so like the inside unit may have a battery that charges up slowly over the day and even utilizes off-peak time, right? So this is a thing where electric cars aren't going to be as big of a problem as people think they will be, because as long as everybody is nice and follows the rules, we can basically make electric car charging off-peak usage. And off-peak usage is drastically different than on-peak usage. So as long as we're not charging electric cars during the day, we can utilize that off-peak time at night to charge those cars and really stabilize the grid a lot more than we could historically. Or like in the morning, whenever we have solar power coming in, we have that we can't utilize because nobody's using electricity in the morning because it's not hot yet, right? So the biggest issue is heating and cooling. So like in the mornings, typically we don't need a lot of cooling. So like maybe at that point in time, the power company could say, okay, we want to bring on more electric car chargers to utilize excess power that's coming in. Instead of building humongous battery banks that are centralized, we just have everybody have an electric car that's getting charged at 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning to utilize that extra power production that we're not utilizing. So electric cars, because they can be charged off peak, as long as we build the infrastructure correctly, they can be charged off peak usage, are not as big of a deal as like on peak usage for heating and cooling and cooking.
I watched a video on a guy. We'll end it right after this. But there's a guy that I watched a YouTube video of. He had 2 Tesla walls or whatever, power walls, and he was in California, and I guess like on peak is crazy expensive, like 3 or 4 times, and then off peak is like super cheap. So he would like time when his Tesla wall would charge on off peak, and then charge his car when he would get home, or run other things, crank the AC because he had full charge. So doing that kind of stuff is not very common now, but it is edge case right now.
And it'll become much more common because like Tesla's a good example of a company that could do it, but it'll become more and more common because these cars are humongous batteries. You're buying a car with a huge battery in it. So like you have a ton of energy storage. Like most people could run their house for a week off of a Tesla. Like you're talking about huge amounts of power storage in that Tesla car. So like it'll become more and more common for for that Tesla car to supplement your power usage as a distributed system. Similar to how the stove battery worked, like it'll become a lot more common for that case of like, because it's the same thing in Oklahoma City. In Oklahoma, like off-peak usage is 8 cents a kilowatt hour, but on-peak could be up to 48 depending on the day. Like today's critical usage rate was 48 cents a kilowatt hour. So like that's insanely different off-peak versus on-peak. That's a 5-hour on-peak for Oklahoma. So like that on-peak usage is way more expensive. So yeah, you can time your car to charge when off-peak, and it's way cheaper. And the power companies are not slammed when it's off-peak, and so they can produce that power and not be as big of an issue.
Well,
so when am I going to have my mini nuclear reactor at home?
Hopefully in the next 2 years. It'll solve everybody's problems, but we're never going to have that because people are scared of nuclear reactors. I would love to have a nuclear reactor in my house, and but it's not going to happen because people are too scared of it. So
yeah.
But there's a hot take for you. I heard this at some point. Localized nuclear reactors, so like a nuclear reactor in a neighborhood, could become a lot more common. Like there are companies or designing the systems that could be used to have a more localized power production in this form of like a small nuclear reactor, in the form of like maybe like a section of a city would have this nuclear reactor put in it, similar to how a substation is there. They could have a localized nuclear reactor there at a substation to produce power, and then negate the need to ship power like hundreds of miles or thousands of miles between the power production and power consumption. We could have more localized power production, which is a big deal because we don't have to upgrade utility lines. So, and like when you talk about smaller nuclear reactors, you talk about limiting the actual issues that could happen of like thermal runaway and stuff like that become a lot smaller of a problem when you have a more localized reactor of like, okay, well, this reactor's got to run away. Cool. Have somebody over there hook the semi up to it, drag it out of the city to our, some sort of like maintenance depot that's got a concrete bunker they can put it in while they work on it or whatever, right? Like we can legit have a semi over there in an hour, hook up to it, drag it off to our maintenance facility. It's got a concrete bunker we can put it in until we fix it, instead of like these humongous power plants that are just like you can't contain. We have to build a concrete bunker around it. Like, no, we could just hook up to the freaking nuclear reactor, like, and drag it away and put it in a concrete bunker and fix it, right? So like this will solve a ton of problems, and like nuclear technology is very, very, very like safe, even though there have been major issues. Like it's very safe technology. So like that's gonna become a thing at some point because it has to. Like there's no way around it. Of like we're gonna have these nuclear power and localized nuclear power production. But I do think localized nuclear power production would solve a lot of problems that we typically see with humongous nuclear reactors. Like I say, just the sheer fact that you can hook a semi up to it and in 4 hours have it drug outside where nobody cares into a concrete bunker, like.
Yeah, they basically.
Why are we not doing this?
Like, because we can. Last Batman movie.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, basically, like we can legit. If we can build it to power a submarine for 30, 40, 50 years, like we can do the same thing at a substation. Put the box there on a freaking semi-trailer and just drag it out if we have to, right? Like even if we don't like have tires on it, we could have like a truck that winches it on there, like winch trucks, so similar to how dumpsters work. Like, oh, we have a truck capable of winching this nuclear reactor onto the back of it and taking it to a concrete bunker. Problem solved, right? We could power a submarine off of this. Why can't we power a neighborhood off of this, right?
Yep. Yeah, this is like this is just a regulatory issue that this doesn't exist already, and mostly
and a PR issue too of like convincing people like it's a good idea. But yeah.
Well, I guess Ethan got tired of us.
Probably got tired of us like talking his ear off, and I think we're supposed to end the episode like 30 minutes ago, and we got rambling.
Well, I guess I'll end the episode then.
Cool. We don't have the bosses in here, so we can end it however we want.
Weird. I've never done this. Shoot. Well, it's been Simply Technical. See ya.